नमस्कार, गुड मॉर्निंग टू ऑल, हैप्पी संडे। दोस्तों, आज खास टॉपिक है हमारा, और ये नॉलेज का जो सीरीज है हमारा रोटरी क्लब ऑफ बॉम्बे वेस्ट एंड महाराष्ट्र सोसाइटी वेलफेयर एसोसिएशन के तत्वाधान में, संयुक्त तत्वाधान में नॉलेज सीरीज है दोस्तों। मंथ के पहले संडे को, मंथ फर्स्ट संडे आपको 10 बजे हम मिलते हैं, एनी हाउ कैसे भी करके। तो आप जुड़े रहिए, और अलग अलग सब्जेक्ट पे हम अवेयर करते हैं, रोटरी और महासेवा। तो आप कहीं पे भी जुड़े हैं, पूना से जो जुड़े हैं, नागपुर से जुड़े हुए हैं, तो आप सभी का, मैं जलगांव से जुड़े हुए लोग, तो आप सभी का स्वागत करता हूँ। आपका होस्ट और दोस्त प्रिंस शर्मा। और आगे बढ़ते हुए आज के खास वेबिनार है, खास सब्जेक्ट है दोस्तों। आप रीडेवलपमेंट हाउसिंग सोसाइटी, जब रीडेवलपमेंट का मुंबई और महाराष्ट्र में दौर चल रहा है, तो अहम सब्जेक्ट है स्ट्रक्चरल ऑडिट और रिपेयर कोऑपरेटिव हाउसिंग सोसाइटी में। आप जब 20-25 साल आपके सोसाइटी को हो गए, तो आप उस मुकाम पे हैं कि क्या रिपेयर करवाएं, रीडेवलपमेंट में जाए, ऑडिट उसके पहले वो उसकी चेकअप होता है। जैसे इंसान का हमारा चेकअप होगा, बीपी शुगर हम टेस्ट करवाते हैं डॉक्टर के थ्रू, उसी तरह से बिल्डिंग का, आपकी हाउसिंग सोसाइटी का भी बीपी और शुगर टेस्ट करना है स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट के थ्रू, या रिपेयर की रिक्वायरमेंट है। इन सब चीजों के लिए आपको प्रोफेशनल आर्किटेक्ट और इंजीनियर की टीम की जरूरत लगती है। उसी विषय पर, महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आज हम अवेयर करेंगे हमारे जो कीनोट स्पीकर मिस्टर गौतम चांदे साहब। मैं उनका स्वागत करता हूँ। साथ ही आज का इस वेबिनार में मैं वेलकम के लिए बिहाफ ऑफ रोटरी क्लब से मैं उनको स्वागत करने के लिए इनवाइट करता हूँ।
This program is organized jointly by Rotary Club of Bombay West and MahaSeWA. And I'm really very happy to welcome you, all of you. Just to give a little brief, Rotary Club of Bombay West is situated at Jutara Road, at Bombay. And we are one of the very old club and involved in so many community services. We are running a one special child's school at Jew. We are also running a one medical center, one blood bank, and various other community services. With this small note, and I also welcome all of you to join Rotary or continue to join for a community services. With this note, I would like to welcome all of you. I request Mr. Sunil Sharma to take proceeding further.
थैंक यू। आनंद गुप्ता जी, जो पास्ट प्रेसिडेंट हैं रोटरी क्लब बॉम्बे वेस्ट के और बिल्डर एसोसिएशन ऑफ इंडिया के फाउंडर भी हैं, तो मैं उनका दिल से स्वागत करता हूं। और यही कहूंगा, और हमारे जो आज के कीनोट स्पीकर हैं मिस्टर गौतम चांदे साहब। गौतम जी, आपका स्वागत है। गौतम जी का और तमाम आप सभी लोगों का दोस्तों, डिजिटल जो प्लेटफॉर्म हम लगातार जारी करते हैं, रखते हैं, इसके लिए मैं गौतम जी का और आनंद गुप्ता जी का, रमेश प्रभु जी का स्वागत करता हूँ। कि जिंदगी में किसी का साथ काफी है, ध्यान दीजिएगा, जिंदगी में किसी का साथ काफी है। आज जिंदगी में आप लोगों को अवेयरनेस का सिलसिला मिला है, आनंद गुप्ता जी और रमेश प्रभु जी, हम सब लोगों के साथ में। तो जिंदगी में किसी का साथ काफी है, कंधे पर किसी का हाथ काफी है। हाउसिंग गुरु का, कंधे पर किसी का हाथ काफी है, दूर हो या पास क्या फर्क पड़ता है। आप जैसे जलगांव में है, नागपुर में है, पूना में है, दूर हो या पास क्या फर्क पड़ता है। डिजिटल पर बने रिश्तों का सिर्फ एहसास ही काफी है, डिजिटल पर बने रिश्तों का सिर्फ एहसास काफी है। दोस्तों, ये अवेयरनेस के जो रिश्ते बनते हैं, ये बहुत बहुत नाजुक होते हैं, बहुत प्यारे होते हैं। तो हम इस खूबसूरत मोटिवेट लाइन के साथ में स्वागत करेंगे आज के कीनोट स्पीकर मिस्टर गौतम चांदे साहब का। गौतम चांदे साहब के बारे में बता दूं, आज स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट एंड रिपेयर कोऑपरेटिव हाउसिंग सोसाइटी के बारे में बताएंगे आपको। 25 ईयर्स का जबरदस्त एक्सपीरियंस है साहब। बैचलर ऑफ इंजीनियरिंग सिविल में और स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट और तमाम विषय के जानकार हैं, पीएमसी। और सबसे बड़ी बात दोस्तों, इनका जो फील्ड है कंसल्टिंग, इंजीनियरिंग, पीएमसी एंड स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट, और 1961 से दोस्तों इनकी जो कंपनी है, 1961 से लेट श्री दिनकर चांदे साहब बी सिविल में ही आर मोस्ट सीनियर आर्किटेक्ट इंजीनियर एंड वेलियर दिनकर साहब, दिनकर चांदे साहब। और उनके बाद इनके पिताजी लेट श्री उदय चांदे साहब, ये भी फर्म नाउ, और आज इनकी 6th जनरेशन है साहब। तो चांदे साहब की आप जैसे देखते हैं, यूडी चांदे, यू फॉर उदय चांदे और डी फॉर दिनकर चांदे। इनके पिताजी और दादाजी दोनों इस फील्ड के महारत से हैं। 6th जनरेशन है गौतम जी की। तो गौतम जी बड़े अनुभवी है और तमाम विषय के जानकार हैं, और ये करीबन 60-70 साल, जो 6 दशक इनकी जनरेशन ने दी है, उनका जबरदस्त अनुभव रखते हैं। और आज इस विषय पे हम सभी को बताएंगे। तो मैं आपको यही कहूंगा कि गौतम जी का अनुभव, आपको काफी 3 पीढ़ियों का जो अनुभव है वो, और साथ गौतम जी पिएटा बड़ी संस्था है आर्किटेक्ट और इंजीनियर की, पिएटा के मेंबर हैं, बीए बिल्डर एसोसिएशन ऑफ इंडिया के मेंबर हैं, ASI अमेरिकन सोसाइटी ऑफ इंडियन इंजीनियर बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर्स हैं, रोटरी इंटरनेशनल रोटरी के पास्ट प्रेसिडेंट है, इंटरनेशनल रोटरी क्लब से जुड़े हैं, पास्ट प्रेसिडेंट है रोटरी क्लब ऑफ बॉम्बे वेस्ट के। ऐसे गौतम चांदे जी का मैं स्वागत करता हूँ। प्लीज वेलकम गौतम चांदे।
Thank you. Good morning. Supravatam, Sat Sri Akal to everybody. Today the topic is structural audits. Briefly, I'll tell you about my company. I think Sunil ji has been very kind to give me a very nice introduction. We are structural consultants, structural auditors, and PMCs for redevelopment. Today the topic is structural audits. So as we get into that, okay. So let me first describe life before structural audits. I think there is some issue with the screen share right now. Okay, let me first get to life before structural audits. Before I get to what structural audits actually mean, people would do work in their flats without understanding the effects on the structure. Building repairs were done with only cost in mind and not actual need. Sometimes and quite often, structure of the building was compromised. Unfortunately, the effects were disastrous in some instances. All of you have heard, unfortunately, of buildings which have collapsed because of people doing some changes, not talking to anybody until it was too late. Unfortunately, lives have been lost. Hence arose the need for structural audits. Now the question is, structural audit hai kya? What is a structural audit? A structural audit is like a health checkup for the building. It includes an inspection of the structure of the building. The question is, what is structure? Some people don't even know that the building consists of different components. What we see in a building is the windows, walls, tiles, finishes, the chak-chak and shano ronak, which is of course very nice. But the real hero in a lot of ways, in terms of the health of the building, consists of the structure. The structure consists of beams, slabs, columns, and foundations. Slabs are fundamentally the floor that you walk in, the ceiling that is above you. The beams hold the slabs and the columns hold the beams and slabs. All this rests on the foundation. There are other impacting non-structural components such as plaster and waterproofing. These components are not directly structural, but they have a big effect on the structure of the building. Now the question is, okay, ये structural audit तो ठीक है, लेकिन क्यों करे ये structural audit? Just as a person ages, they need to get a periodic checkup done. When you're young, you're fine. You can sleep at 5 o'clock in the morning, get up at 7 o'clock. There are no issues. Everything is fine. Then you get older. Eventually, you realize that you need to take care of your body. Similarly, a building also needs a periodic checkup done. This periodic checkup is known as a structural audit. The audit fundamentally helps to identify areas that need repair. It also identifies areas that may pose a threat to the safety of the inhabitants. These are some very important and basic points that a person must be aware of. What other information can be there in a structural audit? You get an idea of the potential cost of repairs. You can prioritize based on funds available. Society can plan the repairs required in a controlled manner. If not done in an organized manner, then repairs can reach an extreme situation. If such an extreme situation is reached, then the society will have to pay a higher amount suddenly. Now, just imagine that, if you think of a family, which is our most basic unit, all of us, suppose your child or whomsoever just calls up and says, Baba, we need to have, I'm buying a very expensive car. I need 70 lakhs right now. You'll say, you have to tell me. You can't just come and tell me that I need something. Or he calls you saying, I'm stuck in some particular place. I knew I was going to go there, but I need 70 lakhs right now. You say, well, you'll be forced to sell something or just pay him the money because it's your near and dear one. Similarly, in a building, if you don't plan your repairs, understand the need for it, you'll be forced to pay money in an unplanned manner, and you'll have no choice but to pay because it may have reached a very dangerous stage. Remember, ignoring the health of the building can endanger the safety of the inhabitants. You take care of the building in which you live, and the building will take care of you. Now, how is a structural audit done? It involves a visual survey identifying cracks, leakages, and other signs of structural problems. A lot of people do not just understand that these are issues which need to be addressed. And the longer you let them linger and continue, you're going to face bigger problems later on. We also identify whether possible adverse changes in flats. Sometimes people just shift bathrooms, load up chhajjas, enclose chhajjas, add too much weight than what is required, or even make some breakages. So wherever possible, these changes are also identified. It also involves non-destructive testing such as ultrasonic pulse velocity, potentiometer, hammer test, carbonation test, chloride test. We also do core tests. Broadly speaking, what these tests tell you, for example, the ultrasonic pulse velocity tells you about the density of concrete, how good the concrete is as an indicative measure, some idea of the strength. A potentiometer tells you about whether the reinforcement has bigger potential for corrosion or whether it is already corroded. The hammer test gives you an indication of the hardness and hence the strength of concrete. Carbonation test tells you about whether the concrete is deteriorated. The chloride test tells you about the level of chlorides in the concrete, which is an indicator of how fast it may deteriorate or how fast it will corrode. The data from the tests, observations during the visual survey, along with engineering judgment, form the basis for the structural auditor's opinion. Now, the knowledge of structural systems is required. What I mean by structural systems is all of you are aware that in the last 10-15 years, a lot of buildings with very fancy elevations have been built. It's very nice. However, a lot of those buildings were built that way, taking advantage of certain municipal rules that required construction in a very, very unique manner, I will say. If somebody looks at these buildings, if somebody looked at these buildings say 10 years before or 10 years from now, it would seem inconceivable that buildings were built that way. There were flower beds, elevation features which were allowed to be built and which were enclosed by people. But that meant there were a lot of areas which were created which would eventually trap water or add load on the building. When we do an audit, we understand that these areas have probably been enclosed in the past, understand the importance of how it could have been done as we decide the impact of what has happened over there. Another thing is the history of construction. Was the building built at one go? Was it built in separate parts? I mean, there are some TDR buildings where you have the older building and then you have another building built on top of that, which were essentially made at very different times and can have very different behaviors. Was there something which happened, during construction? We have gone into some buildings where we have realized that some of the walls are made of concrete. However, they were not structural because there was a phase when some of the internal walls were made out of concrete in Mumbai. Then we have changed back to brick, and now we are going back to a system where some walls will be made out of concrete but will not be structural. We also need to know history of the repair of the building. Was the building repaired 2 years ago and it's been freshly painted, and is it showing cracks right away? Or is it something else? It has never been repaired and it's just showing a moderate level of distress, cracks and sagging. All this information is compiled in the form of a report. These different perspectives are very important to understand the structural health of a building. Once we get a comprehensive idea, then we can sit with the building committee and advise what is the best way ahead. Obviously, the report has to identify areas that are critical, need major repair, and not so urgent repair. Based on this information and discussion with the committee, a repair plan can be made. To summarize, ignoring the health of the building can also endanger the safety of the inhabitants. You take care of the building and the building takes care of you. This, sir, is my basic presentation. If you have any questions, I'm open for questions right now. I have intentionally left certain questions I expect will be asked. But fundamentally, you have to take care of the building. The building, just to once again repeat, is when a building is made, all of you have seen the concrete, the columns, beams, and slabs, the gray part, and the steel being put in. That is like the muscles and the bones of the building. The paint, the finishes, and all that you apply are like the makeup, as I'm calling it. Yes, it's important from the sale perspective of the building. It's important to impress people who go into the building, but the behavior and how well all that functions depends on the health. I've seen buildings which have not been maintained crumble in as early as 15 years. Obviously, something wrong has happened over there. I've seen buildings which have otherwise been standing. People gave the repairs to some contractor who wasn't really qualified, who wasn't chosen. He was just chosen by the building based on, I guess, lowest cost. And it is very unfortunate that this person repaired columns in such a way that the building collapsed. And unfortunately, this has happened just a few streets away from where I live, to the extent where, I remember I was sitting in Delhi. And one of my friends called up and he said, do you know what happened to that building? I said, well, what happened? Well, he said that building collapsed. And I was so shocked because I had just passed that building in the morning on the way to the airport. What had happened was the contractor started making repairs to the columns. He broke one column, not being breaking just one column, he broke the next column also. And at the end of all of that, unfortunately, the building collapsed. I ended up speaking to a couple of people who lived in that building. I had friends over there. It was just harrowing. Fortunately, most of them survived. Only one person lost their life. But this was done because of people not being aware of the audits and what is really required to be done.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Gautam Chandiji.
गौतम सर,
Yeah.
आप देखिए, मैंने क्या देखा है, हर साल जुलाई और अगस्त में पर्टिकुलरली हमारे जो बॉम्बे शहर का मैं बोलता हूँ कि एक या दो बिल्डिंग गिरती है और हमारे मुख्यमंत्री साहब और हमारे बाकी जो पॉलिटिकल लीडर्स हैं वो उस बिल्डिंग पे जाके सहानुभूति व्यक्त करते हैं और फिर सेम कहानी हर नेक्स्ट ईयर भी रिपीट होती है. तो क्या ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, देयर इज नो फोर्स ऑफ लॉ कि इतने टाइम में इतना बिल्डिंग को स्ट्रक्चरल ऑडिट करना कंपलसरी है और यदि नहीं किया तो देयर विल बी एक्शन?
सर, अभी तो रूल ऐसा है कि 30 साल के बाद आपको हर 3 साल में स्ट्रक्चरल ऑडिट करना अनिवार्य है. ओके, मैं तो कहता हूं 10 साल के बाद या जैसे भी आप कोई क्रैक्स देखना शुरू करें आपके बिल्डिंग में, आप स्ट्रक्चरल ऑडिट करना आवश्यक रहेगा. आवश्यक मतलब कैसे होता है कि जैसे आप जस्ट लाइक अ ह्यूमन बॉडी, कि कभी कभी इन योर 20s ऑल्सो आपको दर्द होता है किधर, तो आप ऐसे नहीं बोलते अरे मैं तो 20s में हूं, मुझे कुछ नहीं हो रहा, मैं इग्नोर करूंगा, तभी इंजरी हो सकती है. तभी आप इंजरी का बराबर ख्याल नहीं रखोगे तो जब आपके 40s में जाओगे, 30s 40s या 50s में, तब बहुत ज्यादा प्रॉब्लम हो सकता है. वैसे ही बिल्डिंग जैसे ही आपको लगे कि क्रैक्स होने वाले, आपको स्ट्रक्चरल ऑडिट करना जरूरी है और इट इज रिकमेंडेड. दूसरी एक बात, मतलब अगर आपको कोई चेंजेस करने हैं आपके फ्लैट्स पे, तब भी स्ट्रक्चरल ऑडिट करना जरूरी है, बिकॉज आप उसमें क्या चेंजेस कर सकते हो, क्या नहीं कर सकते, वो सब आप पता लगा सकते हो. लॉट ऑफ बिल्डिंग्स आस्क अस दैट इफ समबडी वांट्स टू डू चेंजेस, the changes have to be approved by a structural engineer fundamentally. Okay, you need a letter from a structural engineer saying the changes are not really required, are not really affecting the structural health of the building. Quite often people are not aware. Sometimes people also try to hide those changes. मतलब recently अभी ऐसे हुआ कि मुझे एक बिल्डिंग से फोन आया, जो बिल्डिंग हमने ही डिजाइन की थी अनेक वर्षों पहले. उनका फोन आया कि कोई कुछ चेंज कर रहा है और आप आ सकते हो क्या? तो बोले 1-2 दिन में आता हूं मैं. दे सेड ओके, नो प्रॉब्लम. 2 दिन के बाद गया मैं वहां पे, और जब तक मैं जाके वो इंस्पेक्ट कर सकता था, उन लोगों ने वो सब कंप्लीट कर लिया था. प्लास्टर टाइलिंग किया, तो जब मैं गया सब फिनिश हो गया. तो आई कुड नॉट सी द स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द बिल्डिंग. स्ट्रक्चर मतलब वहां का जो स्लैब है, कॉलम है या बीम है, उसके ऊपर उन्होंने प्लास्टर लगाया था, टाइल लगाई थी, और बोले देखो जो देखना है देख लीजिए. तो ऐसे ये थोड़ा ट्रिकी सिचुएशन होता है. तो मैं अभी उनको बोलने वाला हूँ कमिटी को कि अगर बाद में किसी आदमी ने ऐसे वापस किया, तो द बिल्डिंग शुड बी ऑथराइज्ड टू एक्चुअली ब्रेक दैट एंड लेट मी सी इट. नाउ इट विल बी डिफिकल्ट टू सी समथिंग लाइक दैट, बट यू मस्ट रियलाइज कि जिस बिल्डिंग में आप रहते हो आप ये नहीं सोच सकते कि ये मेरा फ्लैट है और मैं इंडिपेंडेंटली इसमें कुछ भी कर सकता हूँ। यस, वो आपकी अमानत है, मानता हूं मैं, लेकिन जो आपका फ्लोर है वो और किसी का छत है, और जो आपका छत है वो और किसी का की जमीन है, सो इफ somebody basically does something bad to their floor, it can actually affect the person below. Suppose you come and put a swimming pool in your living room. मैं थोड़ा एक्सट्रीम एग्जांपल देता हूँ कि बड़ा स्विमिंग पूल देते हो आप, 100 लोगों को डालते हो आपके लिविंग रूम में, आपका तो फ्लोर ठीक है, लेकिन पानी जो लीक होगा, अगर स्लैब खुदा ना खास्ता बेंड हो गया तो नीचे का छत हो गया ना वो। सो ये अवेयरनेस काफी लोगों में नहीं है। हम लोगों ने कुछ बिल्डिंग में रिपेयर्स करने पड़े कि हम लोगों ऊपर से जब टाइल्स निकाले लोगों ने, तो उन्होंने ये देखा कि एकदम खराब है स्लैब। नीचे जाके देखा तो देयर डिड नॉट अपीयर टू बी एनी मेजर प्रॉब्लम, बट द पीपल रिफ्यूज टू लेट अस रिपेयर बिकॉज दे वर नॉट अवेयर दैट एनी टाइम द स्लैब कुड हैव कोलैप्स्ड। उनको तो दिख रहा था कि नहीं बस मेरा पेंट ठीक है, मेरे छत में कुछ होने रहा है, जो आपके फ्लोर में करना है आप कीजिए। तो ये अवेयरनेस नहीं था कि उनका जो छत है ऊपर वाले का फ्लोर है, और अगर ऊपर से 2-3 इंच एक स्लैब मानो 6 इंच है, तो अगर 3 इंच ऊपर से गया है तो उनके छत के ऊपर अभी सिर्फ 3 इंच बचा है और वो कब भी गिर सकता है। तो देन वी हैड टू फाइंड अ वे टू रिपेयर दैट फ्रॉम टॉप, बट आई हैड टू वार्न द बिल्डिंग कि इट इज नॉट द बेस्ट फॉर्म टू रिपेयर, इट इज द बेस्ट दैट यू कैन डू विद इन द अवेलेबल possibilities. But the biggest advice I will give is awareness. People must be aware that the building they're living in is like a living organism. Okay, you have the bones, you have the muscle, you have to take care of the structure of your building, and it is not seen. I mean, one case I'll say is one of the buildings I live nearby. I know it was made by an architect, some builder friend of ours. मैं जा रहा था और बाहर से कॉलम में मैंने एक इतना बड़ा होल देखा एंड आई वाज शॉक्ड। आई सेड वाह, ये बिल्डिंग में ऐसे कैसे हो रहा है, मतलब वो आदमी जानकार था, और ये 8-9 साल पहले की बात है। तो मैं चाहता था कि उनको फोन करके बताओ। आई वाज वंडरिंग वेदर आई शुड इंटरफियर इन देयर वर्क बिकॉज दो देयर फ्रेंड्स, देयर इट्स एन इंडिपेंडेंट बिल्डिंग। उन लोगों ने मेरे को फोन किया 3 घंटे बाद, ये हमारे फ्लैट में, हमारे बिल्डिंग में ऐसे कुछ हो रहा है, आप प्लीज आके देख लीजिए। Sure enough, we went to the building. Those people who were carrying out the changes, they were polite. उनके मन में कुछ खराब नहीं था। They said, sure, आप आके देख सकते हो जो भी इंटीरियर्स का काम चल रहा है। सब वर्कर्स थे। हम लोग जब फ्लैट के अंदर गए तो वर्कर्स ने दिखाया कि हाँ ये देखो होल किया है, मतलब उनको पता भी नहीं था कि उन्होंने क्या किया है। और हम लोगों ने उनको पूछा कि भाई क्यों किया, आपको मालूम है कि आपने बिल्डिंग के पैर, द कॉलम इज लाइक द लेग ऑफ बिल्डिंग, उसमें होल किया है। बोले सर हमें वो पाइप निकालना था इलेक्ट्रिकल वायर और एसी का, तो यहाँ पे अच्छी जगह लगी, होल कर दिया। As casual as that. मतलब if we had not caught it, they had done something more, the building was in danger eventually of collapsing if this sort of work is allowed to be done. So the answer to your question as to how frequently the audit should be done, ideally after 30 years, every 3 years. You can also do them every 5 years after 15 years. Okay. But even after say 3-4 years, if you feel there is something happening in the building, for whatever be the reason, normally 3-4-5 साल में कुछ होता नहीं है, so you should immediately have a structural, audit done. It may, at the most, you will be, doing a checkup which you may realize is not necessary, but if something is happening, it identifies areas.
करेक्ट। गौतम जी एकदम सही फरमाया आपने। ऐसा ही एक एग्जाम्पल हुआ था बोरीवली में, लक्ष्मी छाया 2006-7 की बात हुई। आज लक्ष्मी छाया बिल्डिंग में भी जब वो पिलर से छेड़खानी की थी और उसके बाद आज पता है उसका तो कन्वेंस भी नहीं था सोसाइटी के नाम, मतलब कन्वेंस नहीं था, बहुत इशूज हुआ था। बाद में उन लोगों ने इकट्ठा किया पैसा और फिर उसके बाद ऑनर को दिया और फिर वो उसको कन्वेंस मिला, देन फिर वो आज बन के तैयार है। तो बहुत सारी चीजें होती है। मैं चाहूंगा आपकी तीसरी जनरेशन है साहब, आपके दादाजी दिनकर जी आर्किटेक्ट और इंजीनियर और इतना सब बेहतरीन काम किए उस वक्त से, उस वक्त से और आज वक्त में जो बदलाव हुआ बहुत बड़ा, जमीन आसमान का फर्क है। तो जो रूल्स है, रूल्स और जो कानून आने चाहिए, जो भी पीएटा की तरफ से तमाम लोगों की, आपकी जो बिरादरी उसकी तरफ से, बियाबा बिल्डर एसोसिएशन, महासेवा और पीएटा, कि सरकार को प्रेजेंट करे कि कुछ चीजें अब होनी चाहिए जो आए दिन मुंबई में, जैसे अभी आनंद जी ने बोला कि बारिश में कुछ इलीगल कंस्ट्रक्शन भी होते, उस वक्त वो वहां पे वो ढह जाती बिल्डिंग है वो, प्लस जहाँ पे ऑडिट नहीं होता है, सालों ऑडिट नहीं होता है, 50-50 40-40 साल हो जाते हैं कंस्ट्रक्शन को, उस पर क्या होना चाहिए?
आप बोल रहे हो कि
हाँ, प्रेजेंट सीएम और डीसीएम यूडी वगैरह को, ताकि क्या है एक प्रॉपर टेक्निकली प्रेजेंटेशन जाए टीएटा की तरफ से और बिल्डर एसोसिएशन महासेवा की तरफ से, ताकि कुछ सरकार इस पे आपको मौका दे कि नहीं आप ये बात सही है और आप इस पे हम कुछ कर सकते हैं, सख्त
हाँ,
कानून ला सकते हैं।
शायद हमें सरकार के साथ और थोड़ी बात करनी चाहिए। बिकॉज क्या होता है कि लाइक आई सेड, अवेयरनेस है, सब स्मार्ट लोग हैं, बट जैसे हम लोग मानो रेडिएशन इंजीनियरिंग या मेडिकल चीज में हम लोग सिर्फ लिमिटेड चीजें जानते हैं, वैसे वो लोग स्ट्रक्चरल इंजीनियरिंग और अपने बिल्डिंग्स के बारे में बहुत कम जानते हैं टेक्निकल हिसाब से। पहले कैसे था, 2-3 माले की बिल्डिंग हुआ करती थी, उसमें इतना इशू नहीं था, एंड दे वर बिल्ट विथ फार थिकर वॉल्स, चलो बिंदास मानो, तो दे लास्टेड। अभी क्या हो रहा है कि अभी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी भी बढ़ गई है कि आपके जो मतलब हम लोग उसको एमईपी इंजीनियरिंग बोलते हैं, मैकेनिकल इलेक्ट्रिकल प्लम्बिंग, एसी की रिक्वायरमेंट बढ़ गई है। हम लोग जिस हिसाब से बिल्डिंग यूज करते हैं वो भी काफी बढ़ गए हैं। तो उसके हिसाब से नए रूल्स बनने चाहिए, सिंपल रूल्स। मैं मानता हूं कि रूल्स सिंपल होने चाहिए। जितने आप कॉम्प्लेक्स करोगे उतना इवेंचुअल यूजर को प्रॉब्लम होता है। सिंपल बेसिक रूल्स, ये अपना ऑडिट का जो रूल बना है कि आपको हर 3 साल में करना चाहिए, 30 साल के बाद, 15 साल के बाद, 5 years, these are all very good and simple rules. People have to start implementing them in the right spirit. So अगर हम लोग गवर्नमेंट बॉडीज के साथ डिस्कस करके उन्हें इस बारे में एजुकेट कर सकते हैं, यस, दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। मतलब
गौतम जी, कुछ इसके ऊपर कुछ एक्शन है क्या, जो लोग ऐसा नहीं करेंगे?
नहीं, उसके ऊपर एक्शन तो सी, एक्शन मतलब आपको इवेंचुअली क्रिमिनल या कुछ सूट करना पड़ेगा। नॉर्मली सोसाइटी में क्या होता है कि मैनेजिंग कमिटी इज practically powerless to really impose anything on the member। मतलब वो आप फंडामेंटल क्या है कि उनकी आउटस्टैंडिंग ड्यूज है तो वो भी रिकवर नहीं कर सकते, तो उनके घर में जाके उनको बोलना कि नहीं आपको ये रिपेयर करना जरूरी है, वो मुश्किल है। व्हाट द मैनेजिंग कमिटी डज एंड कैन डू इज राइट अ लेटर पुटिंग ऑन रिकॉर्ड कि ये हमने आपको वार्न किया है, आपको ये करना पड़ेगा। उससे वाला देयर इज नो रियल मैकेनिज्म टू फोर्स देम टू डू रिपेयर्स। आई थिंक देयर शुड बी कि स्ट्रक्चरल बात जो है वो बहुत बहुत जरूरी है, और वो स्ट्रक्चर आप एक बार बांधते हो, रिपेयर्स भी क्या, यू डू इट ओनली अ फ्यू टाइम्स, तो जितना आप अच्छा कर सकते हो दैट शुड बी रिक्वायर्ड। रूल करना जरूरी है। अभी तक तो कोई ऐसे रूल नहीं है जिससे मैनेजिंग कमिटी फोर्स कर सकती है। अभी कुछ बिल्डिंग्स में ऐसे होता है कि लोग मैनेजिंग कमिटी की सुनते हैं, वो फोर्स करते हैं, बट दैट इज बेस्ड ऑन देयर रिलेशनशिप और पर्सनैलिटी रादर देन अ रूल।
पार्टिसिपेंट में से कोई क्वेश्चन है तो गौतम जी से कर सकते हैं?
Yeah, okay. So there are some queries. I'm just going to read them
Go
out.
ahead, sir, go ahead.
If the structure of the basement plus 3-story building is casted in 2 runs up to first floor in one, and after 3 years rest is casted, can it affect life of the building? And if yes, how? Will you please explain? This is PK Rathi from Jalgaon. So it depends on what care has been taken for the structure of the building. When the basement and 3 floors was cast in 2 runs, why was it abandoned? What happened in those 3 years? Was it just left open and it kept on raining and care wasn't taken? Did some different loads come on the building at that time, which
Sir,
could have caused?
it was kept open.
Yeah. So then yes, that can happen. It can affect the quality of concrete. We have experienced that at some cases. Sometimes it is not as bad as it seems, but it can have. The effects will be seen only years later, unfortunately. Now there was a building which we had designed, which was left similarly for 3, 4, 5 years. The builder came back to us and said, "Sandhi साहब, अभी फिर से वो building शुरू करनी है, तो अभी क्या करें?" So there we used our audit experience. We tested the last slab of the building which was constructed. They had the concrete salya open and then the last slab, and it just kept on raining on that. So we tested we tested the top slab. We tested some of the lower areas also. We tested the steel. we realized that there had been little bit of deterioration, not as much as we had thought, but as a precaution, and there we could do it because obviously there was nobody living over there. We had them demolish the top slab, which of the building, and cast that new. And the builder was nice, he agreed to do that. But if you're living in a building which has been done that way, there's not much you can do right now. You just have to wait, and hopefully it hasn't deteriorated as much as as it could. You can see, one of the cares you can take is make sure there is proper plastering and painting done for the building throughout its life, because that allows water in. The more you allow water into the building, the faster is the deterioration. Water is the strongest material. It seems soft, it gives us life, but it has the most strength that you're not aware of. It can basically really help deteriorate the structure.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions for the related topic?
Yes, sir, may I bolu?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Anand Alkudkar from Pune.
Yeah.
I've visited one insurance company's office. That building is ground plus 3 floor, and there is a vertical crack right from bottom extending up to the all 3 floors.
Okay.
But one of the columns are also being forming in the crack. So whether this building would be safe for future.
So you said that, can you just repeat how this is a ground plus how many floors building?
Ground plus 3.
Ground plus 3, and there is a vertical crack in the column.
Yes.
Okay.
And that crack is extending right from ground floor to all 3 floors. This is the situation.
Okay. My first thought is, obviously this is a serious thing which needs to be inspected. Okay. But the entire building needs to be looked at for both reasons. Why is only one column cracking, or it is happening to other columns and hasn't been noticed? If even if it is only one column cracking, is it showing up on other structural elements, because they are all at the end of the day connected to each other? So all that has to be inspected before we can really tell you how bad it is. But on the side of precaution, if there is a vertical crack in the building going all the way from bottom to top, and the fact that you're asking me means it seems to be pretty severe, then yeah, you have to be very careful. You have to be very careful about such things. They have to be looked at immediately.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Another question, sir.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, अपना नाम बताइए.
Another question, sir.
Yes.
Sir, you have referred about swimming pool at.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Shall I ask one more question, sir?
Yeah, please.
There was a building at Ahmedabad, and there was a swimming pool containing about 70,000 liters of water. And as a result of earthquake, that building has shaken. It has become a Tower of Pisa. Whether it would need repairs or needs demolition and reconstruction. I'm over.
Okay. If it has become Tower of Pisa, I hope there are no people living in it, first of all.
Yeah.
Or are people living in it?
The persons are living, sir.
Okay. Obviously, that's not, people need to vacate that. But now we have seen something similar. Okay. You need to understand what has happened to the building from a design perspective. Here, you'll need a little bit more of in-depth survey, in-depth analysis. You need to understand whether the building is continuing to tilt or if it is a one-time event. Years ago, when I was in the US, I'll go to a slightly different topic. I'm coming back to, of course, your question. When I was in the US, there was, they're very, very particular about these things. there was a medical center where the top floor of the garage appeared to be tilted, literally. Okay. They went crazy because it had been there for a few years. They didn't know if it had been there from the beginning or if it had tilted recently. They all thought it had tilted recently. So we were called. I mean, I was working in a different firm over there, of course, and I was put in charge of trying to understand what was happening. So there also at that time, this technology wasn't really easily available, but we searched for companies who could do it, and we set up a monitoring system by which we monitored whether the building was continuing to tilt or if the tilt had stopped. We realized that the tilt had stopped, but what we also realized that the building was moving back and forth throughout the day. The system was set up in such a way that if it crossed a certain limit, my mobile phone would get a warning, the owner's mobile phone would get a warning, and obviously the hospital building would get a warning. So we were hoping and praying that nothing like that would happen. Nothing happened like that, fortunately. Closer to home, even in Mumbai, about 8-9 years ago, I was called to a building 10 o'clock at night saying there was a huge 20-30 foot hole in the ground which had just appeared by magic next to the building. It was a big surprise. I went there, and yes, there was, and to the extent where a car parked had just fallen inside. People are obviously scared. We had them evacuated immediately as a safety precaution. We could see the foundations of the building. We monitored the building for a few days. We realized that there was nothing more happening. The foundations were secure. This had happened outside the building. Okay. We monitored the building again for a month or two. We had surveys taken to see if anything was happening. But otherwise, the building had not really suffered any other damage. So we were very confident about having the people go back in. Now, in your case, sir, you're saying that this has happened during an earthquake. The swimming pool being in the building is not really necessarily a big factor. We have designed a lot of buildings with swimming pools in it. As long as the swimming pool was planned from the beginning, pretty much all structural engineers would have considered their weight of the swimming pool and planned for it. If the building has tilted already, one, it needs to be monitored whether it is continuing to tilt. Secondly, it's sooner or later that building is going to fall down. Okay, whether it happens in a few days, few months, or a few years depends on a little bit of luck and how the structure has been designed and what the impact on that is. So you must measure how much it has tilted by. Are new cracks beginning to appear? What cracks have already happened? Have they done something remedial measures and stopped? So once you understand all of that, then you can take an informed decision.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you.
Hello, Gautamji. How are you?
Very good.
I have a question. I'm Bandesh here.
Yeah.
In conjunction with the earlier question that was asked by the gentleman, for buildings which are 30-40 years old,
Right.
what is the way in which we can do a structural audit easily of the foundation? Because that becomes a very important issue. As of this moment, I don't know of easy methodology of doing structural audit of foundation.
Yeah.
What I see is that you have to dig and then go down and then do an audit. Is that some way in which, or with your expertise, which you probably can bring from abroad, where they have certain NDT measures, can you please highlight on how can we do audit of the foundation for older buildings? So that is a critical area.
So I understand, sir. Unfortunately, there's really not much technology. But now that I've asked the question, I will apply my mind, because some of the stuff we did abroad was coming up with test methods, where none existed to some extent, right? So there is something known as ground penetrating radar and all, but primarily it detects just broadly if there are objects and the shape or so. Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, I will find out more. I will take up this question in the right spirit per se. You're right. The foundation must be looked at. Practically, most people don't allow foundations to be inspected. We have brought this point up. There was only one case where we could actually prove to people how important it was. There was a building which showed cracks in the ground floor columns. And to be on the safe side, we said, let's just excavate a little bit below the plinth to see, because the cracks seemed major. When we excavated, we found that the area below plinth, the columns had completely collapsed, practically. Okay. It was a miracle that part of the building hadn't collapsed. So we excavated more. there, because obviously the people were scared, we had to look at the foundations. The foundations were not cracked or anything, but the areas just above the foundation were terrible. So, unfortunately, there is no technology to do a non-invasive scanning. You should look at the foundations. I agree. Fortunately, not much happens to the foundations, but yes, you should look at the foundations because that is what on everything sits, honestly speaking. So the building has to then say, the building has to say that you allow them to inspect, you allow them to excavate. What you can do as a via media is, let's say, about 3-4% of your total columns, you allow the auditor or the contractor to excavate down to the foundation, see what the condition is. If that appears bad or in need of repair, then you have to take an informed decision whether to excavate more and if required to inspect all of them. So that is like a via media, where you just look at, say, you see some columns are badly cracked, expose down to the foundation for that, and then decide what to do about the rest. But even after you expose, you will have to rely broadly on visual things. You can do some concrete tests, but you also want to be very, very careful touching a foundation because you don't want to chip into that.
That's exactly why I
That's
asked
the other
question
balance of it also.
That's exactly why I asked the question of a non-destructive testing, which I know it happens in a couple of places abroad. But I would request you if you could try to see if you can bring that technology to here also. Because if you repair, it's like Budi Godi Lal Lagam, when you repair the upper part, if your foundation is shaky, it's going to keep on repeating every 2-3 years. And I have a lot of buildings which I've seen wherein that happens. Being a civil engineer myself, the foundation is the critical area. So please make some efforts to see if you can bring in some tests from abroad. That will really help. It will be actually put up in a good way into the government also to enforce it. The way NDT has now been enforced in the structural audit.
I'm going to say something which you said, which also came to mind. I didn't say it because the Buddhi Godi Lal Lagam is true for your upper part also, where you have to take care of the beam slab. People focus on, I'm putting 1,000 rupee per square foot tiles and everything and not looking at the underlying thing. So that awareness is really, really required.
Correct. Thank you very much, Gautam.
गौतम जी,
बोलिए सर.
देखिए अभी आपने बॉम्बे में ये जो 14 लाख स्लम ड्वेलिंग यूनिट्स है, अब इसका न तो कोई अप्रूवल है, न कोई स्ट्रक्चरल डिजाइन है, न ऑडिट है.
किनका?
ये जितने भी ड्वेलिंग यूनिट्स हैं, पहले ग्राउंड फ्लोर बनता है, फिर ग्राउंड प्लस 1 बन जाता है, फिर ग्राउंड प्लस 2 बन जाता है. तो उनका भविष्य क्या है?
ये अपने स्लम का आप बोल रहे हो?
सेफ्टी के बारे में.
सी क्या होता है सर कि जस्ट लाइक आप एक I'll give you an example कि हेल्दी आदमी को से 3-4-5 चपाती खानी चाहिए, प्रोटीन खाना चाहिए, सब्जी खानी चाहिए, घी खाने चाहिए, फिर आदमी तंदुरुस्त होता है. वो इतना काम कर सकता है 80-90 साल तक हेल्दीली जी सकता है. अभी आप उसी आदमी को उनके बचपन में एक रोटी, ओके, एकदम पतली दाल और एकदम कम चावल दोगे तो आदमी जिंदा रहेगा, खड़ा रहेगा, लेकिन ज्यादा काम नहीं कर पाएगा. अगर भूकंप या कुछ आया तो आदमी गिर जाएगा. भूकंप एक धक्का लगा तो आदमी गिर जाएगा, वो कुछ सह नहीं पाएगा. ऐसे ही बिल्डिंग का होता है कि सिर्फ खड़ी रहने की बात हुई अंडर इट्स ओन वेट तो बिल्डिंग कैन विथस्टैंड लॉट ऑफ अब्यूज. बट the moment there is even little bit of work required to be done by the building, it can collapse. और unfortunately ये होता है कि ऐसी भी बिल्डिंग आपको साइन देगी, जैसे आदमी रोएगा, अरे दुख रहा है, ऐसे हो रहा है. हम लोग समझते हैं कि बिकॉज हम एक दूसरे की भाषा समझते हैं, लेकिन बिल्डिंग जब रोती है तब हम लोग ये साइन समझते नहीं है कि बिल्डिंग आपको बताती है कुछ होने के पहले कि ये होने वाला है, मेरा ख्याल रखो. लेकिन लोग वो समझते नहीं और इवेंचुअली फिर हमें पेपर में पढ़ने को आता है, अरे ऐसे ऐसे हुआ, बिल्डिंग कोलैप्स हो गई, लोगों की जान चली गई. फिर उनके साथ बात करने के बाद पता चलता कि नहीं, क्रैक्स हो रहे थे, उन्होंने इनको बताया, किसी ने सुना नहीं, कुछ काम हुआ नहीं. सो दैट इज द थिंग. मैं भी काफी बार देखता हूँ कि वो ये ऐसे हो रहा है, कैसे खड़े रहेंगी ये बिल्डिंग्स? खड़ी है, अच्छा है, उसके बाद यू डोंट वांट टू किसी का बुरा तो नहीं कह सकते, लेकिन दे आर आस्किंग फॉर इट अनफॉर्चुनेटली.
In the city area, there are buildings adjacent to each other.
Correct.
Then say there are 3 buildings साइड बाय साइड, तो बीच में वाला बिल्डिंग है, इट इज बीइंग डिमोलिश्ड फॉर रीडेवलपमेंट. So, two adjacent buildings, they are having cracks because those sites are sinking, and at the flooring we find cracks are there. So, what precaution is to be taken in such a situation?
No, can you repeat? You said there are two buildings. The central building is being constructed, and the adjacent buildings are exhibiting
Cracks at their foundation.
cracks at the
At the
bottom.
flooring, we find cracks from this end to that end. Horizontal cracks are being seen, as if those sides are sinking. And the fellow who is developing, he is doing pile foundation work over server.
So what? Okay, I'll tell you. We have encountered that also. Okay, in the past, and in that sense, our role is to first understand what piling that fellow is doing. I have to understand. I'll have to look at both the buildings, understand what the structure of both the buildings are, and then determine whether what is happening is a temporary thing or if it is a major thing, and then they have to do something, change their construction methodology of the new building that is being built. See, in one or two instances in Mumbai, where most buildings in Mumbai are can be quite close by. They were constructing something in the monsoon, and they were not taking enough care, and the adjacent buildings were really concerned. So after we, at one or two places when we reviewed it, we understood that this could be an issue. The building people got in touch with whomsoever the developer was, and the developer actually had to fill in the hole. And then, of course, then they reconstructed it after the monsoon. See, what happens is most of the builders are not really trying to cause problems to the others because it is more headache to them. They are trying to play it safe. When the construction starts, if such unforeseen problems come up, then they have to be tackled. There is no escaping the fact that they have to be, tackled, as they say. But at that time, you have to understand what is happening. Whether it was foreseen that it would happen, or if it was not foreseen, then you have to change your methodology.
Yeah. Thank you, Ji. Thank you.
Yeah. We were, see, at one case where we did an excavation of nearly 12-13 meters, we studied how close the adjacent building was. It helped that we had only designed the adjacent building. So we had some idea, but we knew there were one or two areas which could be slightly tight, and there were the adjacent people did come, the builder did talk to them, but everything went off safely, fortunately. There was no real cause for concern.
Thank you, Ji.
Our friend Rotarian Gautam Chandeji, a very renowned structural consultant, has nicely explained the need of the structural audit, and he nicely equalized. It is as good as checking your own health. जितना इम्पोर्टेंस आपके हेल्थ को चेकअप करने का है, उतना ही इम्पोर्टेंस आपके बिल्डिंग की स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट करने का है. और जैसे जैसे उम्र बढ़ती है, हेल्थ चेकअप की ज्यादा जरूरत पड़ती है, और तो उसी ढंग से जैसे जैसे बिल्डिंग की उम्र बढ़ती है, स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट की भी जरूरत बढ़ती है. और उन्होंने बहुत ही साफ और कम शब्दों में बहुत ही अच्छी तरह ये सबको समझा दिया. उन्होंने ये भी बताया कि हाउ स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट किस ढंग से की जाती है, क्या क्या मेथोडोलॉजीज है. उन्होंने बहुत ही अच्छे ढंग से ये भी बताया कि यदि इसको टाइम से स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट नहीं किया गया और उसके रेमेडी नहीं किए गए, तो इसके रिपरकेशन कहाँ तक जा सकते हैं, और इन पास्ट कहाँ इसका डैमेज लोगों ने भुगता है. मेरे हिसाब से उन्होंने ये भी अच्छी तरह बताया कि गवर्नमेंट ने और सिस्टम ऑलरेडी ड्राफ्ट किया है कि जितने भी बिल्डिंग 30 साल के जूनी है, उन्होंने हर 3 साल में एक बार स्ट्रक्चर ऑडिट करना है उनके खुद के भले के लिए, और जो 15 से ओल्ड बिल्डिंग है उनको 5 साल में ऑडिट करना है. यदि हम ऐसा करेंगे तो सेफ्टी मेजर्स फॉर द बिल्डिंग विल बी ऑटोमेटिकली टेकन केयर, और भी हमें पता चलेगा कि कहाँ रेमेडी लेना है. फ्रेंड्स, we are really thankful to Mr. Gautam Chande for elaborating, educating us on this very important subject of particularly for all Mumbaikar and all the people who are sitting in staying in urban areas. Friends, now I just would like to remind you The next lecture series is going to be on the 5th March. And the subject is waste management, water and solar management, and other civic issues. On this subject, our Rotary Club of Bombay West and MahaSeWA jointly going to organize on 5th March. I request each of you to be present for witnessing this another important subject of our day-to-day affair. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you
Anand
for
ji.
inviting me, Anandji, Sunilji. I think it's a very
Gautam ji.
nice series that you have over here in terms of getting information to people. Of course, my Rotary Club is a big part of it. But thank you, Sunilji, for helping us reach out to more and more people.
Thank you, Gautam ji.
Thank you.